So we've had the UK budget following on from the Isle of Man one, and I've come along to PCW to a tax consultant, Kevin here, who's now going to put some meat on the bones as far as how it affects the Isle of Man. I mean, the first thing I noticed watching it was the Isle of Man got a mention in the budget speech. I mean, that's something you'd never normally expect.
Absolutely right, and it was a positive mention as well, so I think we should be grateful for that. That was in the context of a large project the UK has undertaken to collect more tax from UK residents who have accounts and financial products offshore. The Isle of Man was one of the jurisdictions named in that, and recently we've entered into an agreement with the UK to provide information to them about account holders in the island.
And lo and behold, the news comes out that Jersey has now followed Guernsey, which followed the Isle of Man.
That's right, but the Isle of Man very much leading the way in terms of those negotiations, and was acknowledged and applauded by HMRC yesterday for doing that. And in the context of our history of trying to shed our unfortunate tag of being a tax haven, very positive to have some acknowledgement of the steps the island's taking to become, indeed as it is now, a cooperative tax jurisdiction. So that was good to see. So
what things took your interest?
On several things really. On the personal tax side, I thought it was very interesting to see that the UK personal allowance from the 6th of April is going to overtake the Isle of Man allowance. That's the amount of tax-free income that an individual can have. You still need to remember the bigger picture, of course, that the Isle of Man, for higher earners, has a far more attractive tax regime, but interesting that the balance has been levelled off at the lower levels. There were some interesting measures to make life simpler for entrepreneurs and small businesses. That's the sort of fuel of the UK economy which directly impacts trade flows and business in the Isle of Man. So good to see some measures there to try and stimulate activity. I think on VAT, the big news was that there was no rate change. That was something which the Shadow Chancellor in particular had made a bit of noise about ahead of the budget, perhaps mischief making. But I think obviously given the Isle of Man's direct relationship with the UK on VAT, any fall in VAT rate to try and stimulate the economy would have had a very immediate effect on our revenues here. So it was perhaps good to see that nothing was changed there.
Obviously, Mr. Tier's gone, oh dear, we've lost a penny on beer and there's no increase on the fuel tax coming up through in September, I think it was.
That's right, yes.
So what else do you think will affect Isle of Man PLC? I mean, was it a good or bad budget for us?
I think in overall terms it was a very positive budget. I think the Chancellor in the UK finds himself in a position where he's trying to generate more revenues, but at the same time is trying to position the UK as a competitive tax environment. So it was very hard for him to put tax rates up to raise more tax. So the other way he then does it is to try and stop leakage. And of course that invariably involves offshore and involves places like the Isle of Man. So I think in that respect we've gotten away with this budget relatively scot-free.
And payroll companies got to mention. I mean, we have got some over here, but I know Jersey and Guernsey probably got even more. But this is the sort of side which has made the headlines so much recently, isn't it? The dodgy side.
Indeed, and none of those have been associated with the Isle of Man, I'm glad to say. That we do have operators operating payroll structures here in the Isle of Man, but the majority of those, certainly the ones I'm familiar with, are operating under the IR35 approved legislation in the UK and operating perfectly legitimate HMRC structures. So I think steady as she goes on that one.
Do you see any companies up and going at all, though? Any job losses from what he's announced today? I mean, and this is only the headlines, of course. It's all the detail that comes out over the next week or two that really adds up, doesn't it?
There was nothing in there which would give immediate cause for concern, I would say, Paul. I think it was generally positive. Things like packages on national insurance contributions, for example, a little holiday or a little rebate of national insurance of a couple of £1,000 for UK companies. Interesting to see how that translates to the Isle of Man, because we do follow the UK very closely on that. So I think there are a lot of things which may unfold in the Isle of Man and which may have impact here, but nothing seismic that's going to create uncertainty and job loss, hopefully.
Yet the Chancellor says he's going to be able to claw back billions of pounds from the offshores. Do you concur with that?
Well, I think what he's talking about is unpaid tax from UK residents, first and foremost. So I don't think there's going to be a direct cost to the island on that. The real impact is whether or not business in terms of bank accounts, in terms of financial products, flows away from the Isle of Man as a result of this. We hope not, because alongside the measures which were introduced, there's a disclosure facility to allow UK residents whose tax affairs aren't perhaps quite up to date to do that to bring them up to date, regularise them in a low tax environment. So we hope that those package of measures that's been introduced will mean that there isn't a flight of capital away from the Isle of Man. People can regularise their affairs and move on accordingly.